Hello and welcome to part 2 of my Heartstrings tutorial, where I will show you how to crochet these slightly larger hearts together into one continuous string, again using only one length of yarn. Now in part 1 I did some smaller hearts. In part 2 here, these are slightly bigger. And what makes them bigger is we actually have 2 rounds instead of 1. So with that said, these are a little bit more involved, but shouldn't be too hard to do once you just follow along with me. I have written instructions for this on my Ravelry site, so that'll be a free download. I'll put the link to that in the description so you can follow along there. And again, if you haven't done breakaway techniques before, please watch the introductory videos. Again, links will be in the description. Alright, so something else you will need for these hearts is a walking stitch marker to hold a stitch. But we'll get to that later on. Okay, so let's start with a vertical string here. Again, even though the orientation is vertical, as we work, things will kind of look like this as we work. And again, we work one side and then the other. But since these are 2-row motifs, we actually work all the way around on round 1, and then we just do the partial round 2. Okay, so that's pretty much the order. We work for every motif all the way around with round 1, then partial round 2, then all the way around here, then partially here, and so on. Okay, so that might sound a bit overwhelming, but let's go through step by step and you'll see what I mean. And I'm saying we're starting in the crevice. So the vertical hearts are going to start with a floating slip stitch, which means we do a yarn over pinch, yarn over pinch, yarn over, and go through all 3 loops. And again, that's our floating slip stitch, which will also be our center ring. So all stitches will be worked in those 2 loops. Okay, so to start round 1, we do chain 1, double crochet. These are American terms, by the way. And then 3 trebles. So this is going to be slightly different to if you've already done some of the small hearts, things are going to be slightly different. So pay attention to the charts on the written instructions if you happen to download that. Okay, so 3 treble, and make sure we slide things along so everything fits. Okay, so we're heading down towards the pointy bit of the heart, so we're putting 4 double crochets. Now for the pointy part of round 1, we just work a treble. Okay, now let's work our way back up to the other side. So 4 double crochets. Three trebles. Now a double crochet, chain 1, slip stitch into the center ring, pull that kind of tight, and that's round 1. which looks like a small heart. Again, not exactly like the other small hearts in the other video, but pretty similar. So that's round 1. So now let's start round 2. To do that, just do chain 1, and I'm going to skip that chain stitch and go into that double crochet there. And we go in with a single crochet. In that same stitch, do a half double crochet. In the next stitch, do 2 half double crochets. In the next stitch, do 2 single crochets. And 2 single crochets in the next stitch. Okay, so in the next 4 stitches, do a single crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're at the pointy bit and also pretty close to when we start the next motif. So after those 4 single crochets, do a single crochet in the next stitch, and then chain 1, and we're ready to go on to the next motif, which means we just repeat what we've just done. A quick review: start with a floating single crochet, which is the yarn over pinch, yarn over pinch, yarn over, go through all 3, chain 1, double crochet into the ring, and continue around making that first round. So just doing that final double crochet of round 1, chain 1, and slip stitch into the center ring. So that's the first round of the second motif, and repeat the stitches for round 2 just like we did before, starting with that single crochet, half crochet in the first stitch, and so on. So I'll just do 3 hearts in this string for this sample. So I've gotten to the end here where I do that last single crochet, chain 1 in the pointy bit. To turn the corner, I do another chain and another single crochet in that same space for the pointy bit. Now let's continue around the rest of the round with a single crochet in each of the next 4 stitches. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4. 2 double crochets in the next stitch. 2 double crochets in the next stitch. 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. And then a half double crochet and single crochet both in the next stitch. So that's almost round 1 done. We just need to do another chain 1, and now do a slip stitch again into the center ring. So we're going to kind of encase all those stitches just above there within that slip stitch. Pull that kind of tight to give that heart a good shape. And again, we need to do a slip stitch around the strands between motifs. So go underneath and grab the yarn and pull through. And there's the slip stitch. And now let's continue and finish this motif by doing another chain 1, another single crochet in the same stitch, a single crochet in each of the next 4 stitches, 2 single crochets in the next stitch, and so on until you get back to the beginning. So that was a half double crochet, single crochet, chain 1, and slip stitch over all those other stitches, and move on to the next by doing the slip stitch around and finishing off that final round. And at the very, very end, once you've done that, the chain stitch and the slip stitch through the center ring, just pull it pretty good, and then slip stitch into the beginning stitch, do that chain there, and you can finish that off. And as usual, we've got to kind of stretch and pull things around a little bit once they're fresh off the hook to get everything to look just right. And there is our vertical strand of large hearts. Now I'd like to show you how to do some large horizontal heartstrings, and the difference being this time that the joining points are between on the sides here, and because of that we've got to go over kind of 2 rounds before we get to the center ring, so there's an extra step involved. But basically it is the same process where we get in and do round 1 all the way, and then we start round 2 and then stop at that point there before we go to the next one, do round 1, then partially round 2, and so on. So that should sound very familiar in that sense. So let's get started. By the way, you will need your stitch marker for this as well. Okay, so when we're doing these large horizontal heartstrings, that's actually the first thing we do, is to secure the stitch that's on the hook. In this case, it's a slip knot with the stitch marker. And you don't really have to secure the slip knot, but I'm just doing that to demonstrate how things might look later on, where you will definitely need the stitch marker. Okay, but for now, secure the stitch, and then the first stitch of a horizontal large heart is to do what I'm calling a multiple floating ring. Don't worry about too much about what that means. Just do it like this, just with 3 yarn overs, and then make the floating ring. Yarn over, pinch, pull through 2. Now, all these loops on the hook have a purpose. The first 4 are going to be used to make a treble crochet, which will be the first stitch of the first round. And we'll worry about this last stitch in a minute. But for now, once we've made the floating ring, let's finish the treble by going through 2, go through 2, go through 2, till we have these 2 loops on the hook. And we're going to actually drop the marked stitch off because we don't need it for round 1. I'm going to use it later on. So just take the hook off, put it back in the live loop, and let the slip stitch dangle. We'll come back to that later. Okay, so let's finish off round 1. We start with 4 double crochets into the floating ring. And this means we're heading down towards the point of the heart. And now that we're at the point, do a treble. Four more double crochets. Now getting up to the bumps, we do 3 trebles. A double crochet, chain 1, slip stitch, chain 1, and now we only need to do 1 double crochet, but only 2 trebles because we've already done the first of the 3 at the very beginning. So 2 treble. And now it's time to close the ring. And here's where it can get a little bit fiddly, but it will make a big difference if you do things just the way I explain here. Otherwise, the joins end up looking a bit crooked, and no, we don't need that, do we? Okay, so I'd like you to find that the first, what looks like normally where you would do a slip stitch to close the ring. We're not going to go through there. Instead, look for that strand that will be just below. And you know it's the right one because if you pull it, the connecting thread comes along with it. So that's actually how we're going to do our slip stitch to close the motif. We go through that and we go underneath the connecting strand, and that's, instead of a stitch, that's how we're going to make our slip stitch to close the ring. So I'll do that now with the hook. Go through that strand there, go underneath the connecting strand, yarn over and pull through everything. And that's connected round 1. Now round 2. And here's another extra step that we haven't done before. I'd like you to take the hook out and take the stitch marker off. Now the stitch that had the stitch marker in, that goes back on the hook first, and now the live loop on second. Do it in that order, that's important. So that was the slip knot there and the live loop here, which that's called a replace single crochet, and to finish that off it's just yarn over and through 2. So that's made the first single crochet of the second round. So that's a lot to get your head around, but once you get going and learn it, it'll flow along a lot easier. Alright, to continue with round 2, do another single crochet in that same stitch. Do the 4 single crochets in each stitch along the bottom side there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're at the pointy bit. So in that next stitch, do a single crochet, chain 2, and another single crochet in that same stitch. And now the 4 single crochets, 1 in each stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 2 single crochets in the next stitch, and that's the stopping point for this heart. Time to go to the next. So here's our steps again. The first thing you do before you make a large horizontal heart is put that stitch marker in, work the multiple floating ring, which is yarn around 3 times, make the floating ring. Yarn around, pull through twice, or twice, 3 times. Just keep pulling through until you get those 2 stitches left on the hook. Drop everything off and let the marked stitch hang. Put the live loop back on and continue with round 1. Again, that starts with 4 double crochets and so on. I'll meet you at the beginning of the round. I'm just working the last 2 trebles. And I'll show you once again how to do that joining slip stitch. So again, look at a pointer here. Look for what normally would be the stitch you would go into, but find the loop that's just underneath it. If you give it a little tug, all this bit moves so you know you're in the right place. Go through that. Underneath the connecting strand, yarn over, pull through everything. And that's joined round 1. To set up round 2, let's put the marked stitch back on. And then the live loop in that order. Yarn around, go through 2 to make that first single crochet. Another single crochet in the same space. And that's all there is to it. Make the 4 single crochets in each stitch. Single crochet, 2 chain, single crochet in the next stitch. 4 single crochets in each stitch, or 1 in each stitch, I should say. 2 single crochets in the next stitch, and that's the second one in the series made. I'll do one more and I'll join you back to show you the return row. Now that I'm at the end of the third one, let's go back and finish this string off. Since I've already done 2 double crochets there, we've got 2 more. Again, follow the charts on the written pattern to help you keep track of all the stitches. There's a lot to remember if you just watch the video, so please download that to help you out. Okay, so that was 2 singles, so I've got 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. In the next stitch, do a half double crochet and a single crochet. Chain 1, again go through the center, gather everything up, do a slip stitch, pull that to get it nice and shapely. Skip that chain stitch, go into the next stitch with a single crochet, as well as a half double crochet in that same stitch. 2 half double crochets in the next stitch. 2 single crochets in the next stitch. And that's as far as we're going on that one. So it's time to slip stitch around the strands between. I like to pull that kind of snugly as well. And that's that end one done. So that's really the process. Just keep going until you get back to the very beginning, ending with the 2 single crochets in that next stitch at the end here, and now you can just do a slip stitch into that stitch normally at the end. That's okay, 'cause it's not joined up to anything. And again, you might need to manhandle them a little bit to get them into shape, because you've crammed a lot of stitches into that one center ring. But there you go. You can make that as long as you want, as long as you have enough yarn. And you know, you can use a variety of yarns to do this as well. So in part 3, I'm going to go on further in how you can kind of mix and match these two large and small hearts, as well as putting in a kind of divider, which gives you lots of options for how things look, depending on what kind of project you're doing. So please subscribe, and I hope you'll stay tuned for part 3, and see you then.